March 1937, Newton, Iowa, a town of 15,000 souls frozen in grief. A special train has crossed the country from the East Coast, winding through Midwest tracks for days, loaded with mourners who've traveled hundreds of miles to say goodbye to one man. And now a line stretching 5 blocks snakes through the freezing streets toward the First Methodist Church. 10,000 people. Factory workers in their Sunday best, many of them bought at discounts from company-affiliated stores. Salesmen who shuttered their businesses and traveled from distant cities. Entire families waiting in the bitter late March cold. Small children held in their parents' arms so that someday they can say they were there. All of them waiting to watch the casket of Frederick Louis Maytag pass by. The man who arrived in this town at 10 years old in a covered wagon and built an empire that changed how America washed its clothes. Those who can't fit inside the church are funneled into 4 additional chapels and 2 community halls. Commerce grinds to a halt. The factory machines fall silent for the first time in decades. Local newspapers print special editions with black borders. Newton mourns its patriarch, as if it had lost a father. Because in a way, it had. F.L. Maytag had built their homes, funded their parks, paid their wages. For many in that line, there was no Newton without Maytag. The 2 words were synonymous. Now jump 70 years forward. Same town, October 25, 2007. But this time there are no solemn crowds, no special trains crossing the country, no farewell speeches. Just 550 workers walking out in silence from a 2 million square foot factory. The building is so massive it has its own internal street system. Its own navigation logic that new hires took weeks to learn. The size of 7 Walmarts combined. 48 buildings connected together. For decades, the heartbeat of those machines set the rhythm of Newton. Wives knew which shift their husband was working by the distant sound of the factory. Kids grew up with that industrial hum as background music. Today, that heart stops beating forever. Some workers carry coolers and personal belongings accumulated over decades. Family photos that decorated their workstations. Coffee mugs with the Maytag logo. Others hold handwritten signs with messages of protest and farewell. Many stop at the door, look back one last time, and then do something nobody planned but everyone understands. They take off their work boots. Those boots that have walked the plant's hallways for 10, 20, 30 years. They hang them on the chain-link fence surrounding the building. Others toss them over, as if returning them to a company that no longer needs them. It's an act of protest. A funeral without a body. A silent message saying, "We won't be needing these boots tomorrow." On that fence, next to the hanging boots, someone has placed plastic flowers that resist the October wind. A small, faded American flag. And a plaque shaped like a cemetery headstone that reads, R.I.P. At the bottom, a message scrawled in marker. "We love you all." 2 scenes. 70 years apart. In one, an entire town honors the man who built it. In the other, that same town is abandoned by the company that man created. But here's what makes this story different from any other tale of American industrial decline. What makes it an irony so perfect it seems written by a screenwriter with a cruel sense of humor. That same year of 2007, while workers were hanging their boots on the fence, Newton unveiled a statue. Of who? The Maytag repairman. Oh, lonely. The character from the commercials who had nothing to do because Maytag washers never broke down. For 46 years, that bored repairman had been the symbol of Maytag reliability. And now he was becoming a permanent monument just as the company proved to be anything but reliable. The bronze statue of the lonely repairman was installed in Newton the same year the factory closed. The character who promised Maytag would never let you down turned into a memorial right when Maytag was letting 4,000 families down. Mayor Chaz Allen summed it up bitterly. The Maytag repairman was bored because the people of Newton built a quality product. And now the residents of Newton will be just as bored. How does a giant that seemed invincible fall? How does a brand that defined American quality end up as an empty logo on machines made on the other side of the world? And what happens to the people, the families, the entire generations who bet their lives on a company that promised never to abandon them? To understand the ending, you have to start at the beginning. And the beginning is a German boy, a covered wagon, and a humiliating failure that would change everything. 1867. A convoy of wagons crawls slowly along the dirt roads of the American Midwest. Wooden wheels creak over stones and mud, leaving ruts that the next rain will erase. Dust rises with every step of the horses and covers everything in a gray layer. The wagon tarps, the travelers' clothes, the food they eat at rest stops. Among the travelers is the Maytag family: Daniel, William, Amelia, and their children, the oldest of whom is named Frederick Louis. He's 10 years old, the first of 10 siblings his parents will have. His parents are German immigrants who anglicized their original surname Maytag, meaning May Day, upon arriving in America, as so many immigrants did who wanted to sound less foreign in their new land. Their destination is a small farm near Laurel, in Marshall County, Iowa. That farm would remain in the Maytag family's hands for generations, long after the name became synonymous with washing machines. Frederick grows up with his hands in the dirt. He rises before dawn to feed the livestock while dew still covers the fields. He works the land until the sun hides behind the cornfields. He only attends school during winter months, when the ground is frozen and there's no harvest to tend. Summers are for work, always for work. His formal education is minimal. Rural school in a one-room building, and a brief stint at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, which he abandons after a year. But what Frederick doesn't learn in classrooms he learns in the fields. Practical mechanics. The art of fixing what's broken with whatever tools you have at hand. The value of hard, steady work. And something else. Something that would mark him forever. The frustration of depending on tools that fail when you need them most. Around 1880, young Frederick leaves the family farm and moves to Newton. He's 23 years old and hungry for something bigger than planting corn and milking cows. He lands a job at an agricultural implements business, selling the same tools he used on his parents' farm. In less than a year, he's co-owner. He sells it, buys a lumberyard, sells that too. Frederick Maytag isn't a man who settles for what he has. Every business is a stepping stone, not a destination. He's searching for something, though he doesn't yet know exactly what. September 20th, 1882, brings the moment that will anchor him to Newton forever, though it has nothing to do with business. That day he marries Conradina Wilhelmina Bergman, whom everyone calls Dina. She's the sister of two men, William and A.H. Bergman, who will become his business partners. The marriage into the Bergman family is the anchor that fixes Frederick in Newton for the rest of his life. Dina and Fred are perfect opposites who somehow fit together. She prefers the shadows, the tranquility of home, the private life away from spotlights. He enjoys being the center of attention, shaking hands, closing deals, giving speeches. The marriage will work for more than 50 years, until Dina dies in 1934. They'll have 4 children: Elmer, Louise, Louis, and Frida. 2 of those children will shape the company's future in very different ways. 11 years after the marriage, in 1893, 4 men gather in Newton to found a company. Frederick Maytag, his brothers-in-law William and A.H. Bergman, and an inventor named George W. Parsons. Each puts in $600, $2,400 total. Not a penny more, not a penny less. The company is called Parsons Band Cutter and Self-Feeder Company, a name that means nothing to anyone today, but which back then described exactly what they made. Automatic feeders for threshing machines, the equipment that separated grain from chaff during harvest. The product? Nothing glamorous. Feeders for threshers, band cutters, hay presses, hog waterers, corn shellers. Farm equipment for the Iowa farmers Frederick had known since childhood, because he'd been one of them. The first factory is an abandoned stove workshop. 30 by 40 feet. Low ceiling, wooden walls, scarce light filtering through dirty windows. A space so modest that no one would have imagined an industrial empire would be born there. But Frederick has something his partners don't: an almost pathological obsession with product quality. Every machine that leaves that workshop carries his name attached to it. And Frederick Maytag will never tolerate his name being linked to mediocre products. By 1902, the company is the world's largest manufacturer of thresher feeders. Success should be cause for celebration. They should be popping champagne and planning expansion. But there's a problem with a deeply ironic name. One of the company's flagship products is a corn sheller that someone, perhaps with excess optimism, perhaps with a cruel sense of humor, christened the Success. The name turns out to be destiny's joke, because the damn thing is an absolute engineering disaster. It breaks down constantly. Parts fail without warning. Gears jam at the worst possible moment, right when the farmer needs the machine most. Farmers call Maytag to complain, furious, demanding they fix the piece of junk they sold them with so many promises. Frederick spends more time traveling Iowa's roads to repair defective machines than selling new ones. Every complaint is a stab to his pride. Every return is a public humiliation. The Success sheller becomes his greatest failure, the nightmare that haunts him from farm to farm. But from that failure, something more powerful than any commercial success is born. An obsession. An obsession that will define everything that comes after. When in 1907, Frederick buys out his partners and takes complete control of the company, he makes a vow. A vow born from the shame of the Success sheller. From the sleepless nights thinking about disappointed customers. From the humiliation of selling products that didn't work. From this moment forward, a Maytag product will always be reliable. Always. No exceptions, no excuses. Reputation is built with every unit that leaves the factory. A defective machine isn't just a return and a refund, it's a broken promise. It's the Maytag name stained. And Frederick Maytag doesn't break promises. That vow, born from failure, forged in shame, will become the foundation of an empire. And decades later, the cruelest irony when the company breaks the most important promise of all. But farm equipment has a fundamental problem that no obsession with quality can solve. It's seasonal. Farmers buy threshers before harvest. Not in the dead of winter when snow covers the fields. There are entire months of the year when nobody walks into the store asking about a thresher feeder. The factory sits half empty during those dead months. Workers get paid less or are laid off temporarily until the season returns. Cash flow chokes like a river drying up in summer. Frederick needs a product that sells in January and July, something domestic. Something people need year-round regardless of whether it's snowing or sweltering. Something to fill the dead time. The answer arrives that same year of 1907. Washing machines. Why washing machines? Because hand-washing clothes was a hell that no one who hasn't lived it can imagine. It was 1907. Automatic washers didn't exist. Neither did modern detergents. To wash a family's clothes, a woman had to heat water for hours, haul heavy buckets to a wooden tub, and kneel to scrub every garment against a corrugated washboard until her knuckles bled, and her back screamed in pain. Wring, rinse, wring again. An entire day of brutal work that had to be repeated every week. Hands cracked, backs permanently hunched, and this torture had no end. The first Maytag washer is called the pastime washer, an optimistic name that promises to turn exhausting labor into pleasant leisure. The tub is made of the finest cypress, corrugated inside to create friction. The mechanism is a primitive agitator operated by hand with a crank. The wholesale price is between $6 and $7.50. Retail, between $11 and $15. To put this in context, an average worker of the era earned a few $100s a year. A Maytag washer represented weeks of wages. It was a serious investment, almost a luxury. But the women who tried it, who felt the relief of not having to destroy their hands against a washboard, never wanted to go back. Never. In 1907 they only sell a handful of units, because they introduced the product late in the year. But in 1908 they sell 3,700. In 1909, nearly 5,000. The growth is explosive, vertical, unstoppable. By that year, the washer already outsells all the farm equipment combined. Frederick Maytag has found his gold mine. But he still doesn't know that the real treasure isn't the machine, it's a man. Howard Snyder was born in 1868 in Austin, Minnesota. A small city not much different from Newton. He has no formal engineering education, no college diploma, no technical certificates, no credentials of any kind hanging on any wall. He's a mechanic, farmer, self-taught inventor, the kind of person who looks at a broken machine and immediately sees what's wrong, how to fix it, and how to improve it so it won't fail again. His hands understand metal in a way no textbook can teach. His mind sees solutions where credentialed engineers only see problems. Frederick Maytag discovers him almost by accident, following the trail of a commercial mystery. The company sells farm equipment throughout the Midwest, and they receive complaints from everywhere. Everywhere except Mower County, Minnesota. The same product, the same usage instructions, the same materials, but zero complaints from that specific area. It's statistically impossible. Something's happening there that isn't happening anywhere else. Maytag travels personally to Austin in 1896 to investigate. What he finds leaves him speechless. Howard Snyder, a local mechanic working for his father-in-law in a farm implements business, has been modifying Maytag machines on his own. Without asking permission. Without consulting anyone. He simply saw the design flaws that factory engineers never caught, and fixed them. Reinforced weak points. Redesigned parts that failed. Turned mediocre products into products that worked perfectly. Maytag offers him a job on the spot. Without hesitation. Come to Newton. I'll pay you well. You have a talent I can't ignore, and I can't leave working for the competition. Snyder declines. His young son died the previous fall and grief paralyzes him. He doesn't have the strength to pack up and move to an unfamiliar town. The pain anchors him to Austin like an invisible chain. But 2 years later, in 1898, something changes inside him. Maybe the pain becomes more bearable. Maybe Austin's routine becomes unbearable. Maybe Maytag's offer keeps echoing in his head like a promise of reinvention. Snyder agrees to relocate to Newton with his family. It's the best decision Frederick Maytag will make in his entire life. Years later, already old and wealthy, he'll call him with emotion cracking his voice. The best friend I ever had. Snyder quickly rises to head of the development department, the position where he can do what he does best. Improve things. And he begins transforming Maytag washers from good to revolutionary. One innovation after another. First comes the improved corrugated cypress tub with a more efficient design. Then the hired girl, with an integrated milking stool agitator, built into the lid, which mimics the motion of hands when milking cows. In 1911, Snyder adds an electric motor to the washer, eliminating the manual crank that exhausted women's arms. Now you just plug it in and wait. But millions of American farms still don't have electricity. The wires haven't reached rural areas. How do you sell electric washers to families without outlets? In 1914, Snyder solves the problem with the multi-motor, a washer with a gasoline engine. Rural families already have gasoline for their tractors and vehicles. Now they can have a Maytag even if they live miles from the nearest power line. In 1919 comes another innovation that seems minor but changes everything. The cast aluminum tub. No seams that can leak. Square with rounded corners for easy cleaning. Doesn't rust like metal. Doesn't rot like wood. Doesn't stain clothes. Lasts decades without deteriorating. Each innovation is a step forward. Each improvement solidifies Maytag's reputation as the brand that keeps its promises. But none of these improvements prepares the world for what's coming in 1922, for the invention that will change the industry forever. Legend has it that it was an accident, like so many great discoveries. The Model 70 had a milking stool-type agitator mounted on the washer lid. It was the standard design of the era. The mechanism on top, pushing clothes down through the water. One day, during a routine test in the development workshop, the agitator came loose from its mount and fell to the bottom of the tub. It landed with its legs pointing up, like a dead bug floating in the soapy water. Howard Snyder looked at it. Any other engineer would have picked up the agitator, remounted it on the lid, and continued with the test. But Snyder wasn't just any engineer. Snyder was the man who saw solutions where others only saw accidents. And he had a revelation. One of those ideas that seems obvious after someone has it, but that no one had thought of in decades of making washing machines. The agitator shouldn't be in the lid. It should be at the bottom. Think about what this means. Every washing machine in the world worked the same way since they were invented. A mechanism on top dragged clothes down through the water, scrubbing them against corrugated surfaces. It was cleaning by friction. The same principle as the washboard but mechanized. Clothes got clean because they rubbed against something rough over and over again. The problem is that friction also destroys fabrics. Every wash was a small act of violence against clothing. Garments wore out, frayed, ripped before their time. Snyder's idea was radically different. An agitator with blades at the bottom of the tub that oscillated from side to side, creating water currents that moved in all directions. Instead of dragging clothes through the water with brute force, the water itself would pass through the clothes with gentleness. Garments would remain floating, in substantial suspension in the liquid, as the engineers described it, while the currents did all the cleaning work. Less friction. Less damage to fabrics. Cleaner clothes that lasted longer. They called it Gyrafoam, and it changed the history of appliances forever. Before the Gyrafoam, Maytag was the 38th company in washing machine sales in the United States. 38th. A minor player, almost insignificant, in a crowded market of competitors with decades of head start. 18 months after introducing the Gyrafoam, Maytag was the most popular washer in America. By 1926, the world leader in sales. By 1927, producing more than double the washers of any competitor. Let that sink in for a moment. From 38th place to number 1 in 18 months, not through a brilliant marketing campaign, not by slashing prices until they lost money, not through financial tricks or hostile acquisitions, through an invention, through an idea that a self-taught mechanic from Minnesota had while looking at an agitator that accidentally fell to the bottom of a tub. In just 4 years, Maytag sold $200 million in Gyrafoam washers. $200 million 1920s dollars. Equivalent to more than $3 billion today. All thanks to the man without a diploma. Howard Snyder didn't live to see the full impact of his invention. He died in 1927, at 57 years old, from pernicious anemia complicated by pneumonia. His funeral was an unprecedented event in Newton. A half-mile procession of Maytag employees marched through the town's main streets, led by the municipal band playing funeral marches. F.L. Maytag, already elderly, wept publicly for the best friend I ever had. The man without a diploma had revolutionized an industry and died before turning 60. But his legacy endured. The Gyrafoam didn't just make Maytag rich. It changed American domestic life in ways we still feel today. The time American women saved with automatic washers is literally incalculable. Millions of hours that were once devoted to scrubbing clothes could now be devoted to education, to paid work outside the home, to civic participation, to rest. The washing machine isn't just an appliance. It's a tool of liberation. And Newton, Iowa, became the place where that liberation was manufactured. In 1924, 1 in 5 washing machines sold in all of the United States 20% of the national market carried the Maytag name stamped in metal. Newton earned a nickname that appeared in newspapers and magazines across the country. The washing machine capital of the world. And it wasn't an exaggeration. In the early 20th century, Newton had 5 or 6 different washing machine manufacturers operating simultaneously. Hawkeye Incubator, 1-Minute Washer Company, Automatic Washer, Woodrow, and of course Maytag. The town was a hotbed of innovation in laundry technology. But over time, competitors fell one by one. Some went bankrupt. Others were bought out. Others simply couldn't compete with the Gyrafoam. Maytag kept surpassing them, absorbing them, crushing them with the force of a superior product, until only one was left standing, the sole giant. In October 1926, Maytag set a world record that made headlines from coast to coast. 8 complete trains, loaded exclusively with washing machines, left Newton in a single day. 8 locomotives pulling cars filled with Gyrafoam machines heading to homes across the country. The largest merchandise shipment in industrial history up to that point. By 1927, they had produced their first 1,000,000 units. 1,000,000 washing machines, each with the Maytag name gleaming on the metal. The factory grew like a living organism, devouring land, expanding building by building, acre by acre. Plant 2, built in 1949 and expanded multiple times over the decades, ended up occupying between 2 and 2.5 million square feet of manufacturing and storage space, 175 acres of industrial land, 48 buildings connected by hallways and tunnels. A complex so vast it had its own internal street system with names and signage, its own navigation logic that new employees took weeks to master. At peak production, 4,000 employees worked just at the Newton facilities. In a town of 16,000 residents, do the math and let that number hit you. 1 in 4 Newton residents worked directly for Maytag. By the late 70s, the company employed 18,000 people worldwide, but Newton remained the beating heart of the entire empire. But cold numbers don't capture what Maytag meant to Newton. They don't capture 4 generations of the same family working in the same factory. The great-grandfather who started in 1920 when they were still making wooden washers. The grandfather who started in 1945 after coming back from the war and found a job the same day he stepped off the train. The father who started in 1970 and met his wife on the assembly line. The son who started in 1995 thinking he'd work there until retirement. Like his father, like his grandfather, like his great-grandfather. We have a saying, Mayor Chaz Allen explained to journalists who arrived to cover the closure, that the people who come to work every day bleed blue. They bleed Maytag blue. It wasn't an empty metaphor. It was identity. It was belonging. It was the absolute certainty that if you worked hard and were loyal to the company would take care of you and your family. Just as it had taken care of your father, just as it would take care of your children. A sacred pact between worker and employer that was renewed with every paycheck, every promotion, every retirement celebrated with cake and speeches in the plant cafeteria. Frederick Louis Maytag cultivated that relationship with deliberate investments that went far beyond wages. He built hundreds of houses for workers in neighborhoods near the factory and sold them on easy terms, with monthly payments any laborer could manage. In 1935, during the depths of the Great Depression, he bought the abandoned grounds of the old county fair and donated a 40-acre park to the city. He invested $325,000 of his own money, a fortune at that time, to turn it into Maytag Park, with an Olympic-sized pool, picnic areas, sports fields. He built the Maytag Bowl, a Hollywood-style outdoor amphitheater completed in 1936, where, according to local legend, Judy Garland performed in her younger years. He funded a $250,000 YMCA that became a community center. He built the Hotel Maytag, which opened in December 1926. 5 floors of luxury with 100 rooms. The first hotel west of the Mississippi with central air conditioning, the first with radios in every room. And he had a habit that became local legend, repeated in every obituary and every oral history of Newton. He would walk through the factory regularly, approaching workers at their stations while machines hummed around them, and always asked the same question with a broad smile. Is everybody happy? Decades after the strike of 1938, when workers returned defeated under National Guard bayonets, the founder's son, Fred Maytag II, made a comment that captured all the irony of that question. Apparently our employees weren't as happy as we thought. But that comes later. Before the dark side, you have to understand the bright side. And the bright side was a paternalism that, for all its contradictions, worked for many people for a long time. When Frederick Maytag died on March 26, 1937, in a Los Angeles hospital, near his winter residence in Beverly Hills, he left an estate valued at $10 million, equivalent to more than $220 million today. But more important than the money was what he left in Newton, a thriving factory that had survived the Great Depression, a brand respected around the world, and a community that revered him like a secular saint of benevolent capitalism. 10,000 people at his funeral. A special train crossing the country with mourners. 5 blocks of people lined up to watch the casket pass. The family mausoleum at Newton Union Cemetery, with the word Maytag engraved in capital letters above the stone door. The boy who arrived in Iowa in a covered wagon now rested in marble, less than a mile from the factory he built with $600 and a vow of quality. But here's the thing that nobody mentions when they tell the story of the benevolent businessman who asked his workers if they were happy. The thing that doesn't appear in the obituaries or the funeral speeches or the commemorative plaques. There was another side to Maytag, one that didn't make it into the press releases. Workers of the era described Maytag's labor system as a benevolent autocracy. The term sounds almost positive if you don't think about it too hard. Autocracy. Rule by one person, absolute power. Benevolent, well-intentioned, generous. Sounds like a kindly dictator. A king who takes care of his subjects. Sounds tolerable. Until you hear the details. If you worked at Maytag, there was pressure never written in any contract, but implicit, constant, impossible to ignore, to buy your car only through company-affiliated dealers, to use mortgage agencies connected to Maytag when buying a house, to become a member of the Maytag YMCA, not any other gym, to donate regularly to the specific charities that Maytag supported, to buy milk exclusively from distributors designated by the company. An assembler named Siebert Chestnut, interviewed decades later by labor historians, described it without beating around the bush. Straight feudal tribute for holding a job. Think about that phrase. Feudal tribute. Like medieval peasants who had to hand over part of their harvest to the lord of the castle in exchange for protection and the right to work the land. Maytag didn't pay poorly. In fact, they paid well compared to other options available in rural Iowa. But a significant portion of that salary flowed back to the company through mandatory channels that nobody dared question. Forced purchases, required donations, non-negotiable memberships. A closed-loop design so the money never really left the Maytag ecosystem. And inside the factory, conditions were far from the paradise suggested by the public image of F.L. walking the halls asking if everyone was happy. Foremen ran little empires within the plant, with almost absolute power to hire, fire, assign tasks, and set work pace according to their personal discretion. Farm boys, accustomed to the natural rhythm of seasons and outdoor work, seldom adjusted easily to the grueling labor discipline of the assembly line. The noise was deafening, metal against metal, engines roaring, tools pounding, everything amplified by high ceilings and brick walls. Summer heat was suffocating because ventilation barely existed. Winter cold seeped through every crack in the building. But for decades, workers put up with it without complaining too loudly. Good wages compared to the alternatives. Stability that no farm could offer. The implicit promise of a future for your children, that they too would have work if they wanted it. What did it matter if you had to buy your car where they told you, and donate to the charities they pointed out? All of that exploded in 1938. And when it exploded, the world saw exactly how benevolent the autocracy really was. The Great Depression had been tearing apart America's economic fabric for almost a decade, but Maytag was one of the few companies that remained consistently profitable. People needed to wash clothes, depression or not. Washers sold. Factories ran. Orders kept coming even if they were fewer than in the boom years. Then, in May 1938, company management announced a 10% wage cut for all plant workers. 10%. Despite the fact that the previous year they had recorded profits of 42% over operating costs. Despite the fact that workers had already endured years of economic uncertainty and reduced hours. Despite everything they had given to the company. All the loyalty, all the feudal tribute. On May 9, 1938, workers voted to strike. And what followed was one of the most brutal and least remembered labor battles in Midwest American history. At first it was a relatively conventional strike. Pickets at the factory gates with workers holding signs. Slogans shouted when executives drove in. Negotiations that started with optimism and ended without agreement. But by late June, the situation escalated from labor protest to open warfare. On June 23, union sympathizers did something that changed everything. They forced workers who wanted to return to work out of the building. Then they went in themselves. They seized the plant. They occupied it. They locked the doors from inside. And they held 5 foremen as prisoners for 9 days, refusing to release them until the company negotiated. Union leaders were arrested and charged with kidnapping. They went to trial. They were sentenced to 6 months in jail and $500 in fines each. But that didn't stop anything. The strike continued. On July 19th, a crowd of 600 people gathered in front of the factory gates to prevent anyone from going in to work. 200 of them were women workers, wives, mothers, sisters, daughters who marched in a circle in front of the East Gate singing slogans. When Deputy Police Chief L.A. McCall tried to drive a car with a company executive through the picket line, the women and some men did something extraordinary that would become local legend. They crouched down, grabbed the back of the vehicle with their bare hands, and lifted it until the rear wheels spun in the air without touching the ground. The car wasn't going anywhere. The executive inside stared out the window with wide eyes. The deputy chief didn't know what to do. The women held the car in the air, defiant, until finally McCall gave the order to retreat. After the cop retreated in humiliation, the strikers ripped up the bricks from the sidewalk in front of the plant. They stacked them in neat piles. They distributed them among the protesters. Improvised weapons for the battle everyone knew was coming. Street fights broke out over the following days. The ugly mood turned into open violence. 34 people were injured in clashes between strikers and those trying to break the strike. Blood stained the streets of Newton, the town where F.L. Maytag used to ask if everyone was happy. And then came the response from the state of Iowa. Governor Nelson Krashel declared martial law over Newton. He didn't send mediators. He didn't propose neutral arbitration. He didn't seek compromise. He sent the army. When asked what legal authority he had for that decision, Krashel responded with a phrase that deserves to be remembered. "I have a good leg to stand on in this case." The Iowa National Guard. 4 companies of the National Guard deployed in Newton's streets as if it were enemy territory, including a machine gun company from the 113th Cavalry Regiment. Think about that for a moment. Mounted machine guns aimed at workers from a washing machine factory. Armored vehicles patrolled the town's streets around the clock. Guards with rifles and fixed bayonets formed cordons around the factory. Tommy submachine guns in the hands of young soldiers who probably knew some of the strikers, tear gas weapons ready to use, automatic pistols on every hip. Each soldier was issued 10 rounds of ammunition with orders to use it if necessary. Newton, the town of washing machines, the town where F.L. Maytag built parks and hotels for his community, was under military occupation. During martial law, no civilian automobile could drive within 2 blocks of the plant. Gatherings of any kind were prohibited under penalty of arrest. Social clubs canceled all their meetings. Bars closed by military order. Even softball games in the park were declared illegal as potential seditious assemblies. The message was crystal clear: absolute order or consequences. Union leaders, from their cells or while out on bail, begged workers not to defy martial law. It can only result in violence, they warned. It can only result in death. And they were right. There was no way to win against tanks and machine guns. No heroism was possible, only pointless martyrdom. On August 3, 1938, Maytag workers voted to return to work. They accepted the 10% wage cut that had started it all. They lost. But before going back, they issued a resolution that deserves to be read word for word, because it captures something essential about human dignity in the face of crushing power. We have only our labor to offer the Maytag Company at a fair price. Our wives, our homes, our children, and the city of Newton depend upon our wages. We have no reserves. We cannot match our wages against stock dividends. We hold firmly to the principle that human rights have priority over property rights. And they added a final line that would echo for decades: we are returning to work under compulsion of military force. The next morning, Maytag workers filed in a single line toward the factory gates. Around them, armored vehicles with engines running. On nearby rooftops, soldiers with rifles aimed downward. One veteran worker, looking at the bayonets gleaming in the August sun, said what many were thinking: I never worked under bayonets, and I never will. But he did. Because he had no choice. Because his children needed to eat. Because sometimes, losing is the only way to survive. This is where the story could sink into total darkness. But there was a moment of light worth remembering, because it contrasts brutally with what would come decades later. Elmer Henry Maytag, E.H., son of the founder, ran the company during the Great Depression. And he was different from the executives who would take control after the family lost the reins. During the hardest years of the economic crisis, when the factory had to close temporarily because there simply weren't enough orders to justify production, E.H. did something no business manual would recommend. He opened the factory anyway. He called the workers in, and he paid their wages out of his own pocket so that Newton's families would have a decent Christmas. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't an advance to be deducted later. It was E. Maytag writing personal checks so that families who depended on the company wouldn't go hungry in December. When neighbors in town went through hard times, unpayable mortgages, medical bills, family emergencies, E.H. anonymously paid thousands of dollars in aid without expecting recognition or repayment. E.H. Maytag died in 1940. His spirit, that of the boss who genuinely cared about his people, who put money from his own pocket when times were hard, died with him. What came after were professional managers, executives with business school degrees, men who saw numbers on spreadsheets instead of families depending on those numbers. Remember E.H. Maytag paying wages from his own pocket during the Depression. You're going to need it when we get to the executives who collected millions of dollars while destroying everything he built. But before the destruction came the final glory. Before the fall came the most successful and most ironically prophetic advertising campaign in the history of American television. 1967. The Leo Burnett Advertising Agency in Chicago pitches an idea for Maytag commercials. The concept is brilliant in its simplicity. A Maytag service repairman who has absolutely nothing to do because the appliances are so reliable they never break down. He sits alone in his empty workshop, bored out of his mind, waiting for a phone that never rings. He plays solitaire, does crosswords, watches the clock. They called him Old Lonely. The first actor, Jesse White, played the repairman for 21 years. Then came Gordon Jump, who did it for 14 more. The campaign lasted 46 years total. Maytag repairmen became an American cultural metaphor for any professional whose services nobody needs. A firefighter in a town with no fires. An umbrella in the desert. A Maytag repairman. The advertising message was simple and powerful. Buy Maytag, and forget about problems. So reliable that the poor repairman dies of boredom waiting for something to break. But the irony nobody saw coming was that the lonely repairman became a prophecy. Just not the way the advertisers imagined. Frederick Louis Maytag II, grandson of the founder, died of cancer in 1962 at 51 years old. He was the last family member directly involved in daily management of the company. After him, professional managers took control for the first time in company history. And the blood heirs did something unexpected. They fled. Frederick Louis Maytag III, known as Fritz, rejected the washer empire. In 1965, he bought a dying brewery in San Francisco called Anchor Brewing for $5,100. The family back in Iowa couldn't understand what he was doing, but decades later, Fritz is universally recognized as the father of the craft beer revolution in the United States. His cousin Bud Maytag Jr. also fled toward aviation, becoming the youngest airline president in America. The irony is perfect. The heirs who rejected the family business succeeded. The professional executives who stayed behind destroyed it. And there was something else the family left behind that almost nobody knows about. The cheese. Maytag had bought a Holstein cow in 1919 to have fresh milk. His children turned that herd into Maytag blue cheese, an artisanal blue cheese that's still produced in Newton today. The washer stopped being made there in 2007. The cheese is still being made. A cow bought to give milk to some children created something more lasting than a $2 billion empire. But let's get back to that empire. Because while the heirs were fleeing, the professional managers were planting the seeds of destruction. The seeds were planted in 1980, when President Daniel J. Crum decided to transform Maytag from a focused washer specialist into a full-line appliance manufacturer. The idea was to compete head-to-head with the giants, Whirlpool, General Electric, Frigidaire. To do it, Maytag started buying companies with borrowed money. In 1986, they acquired Magic Chef for $737 million. In 1989 came Chicago Pacific Corporation, owner of Hoover, for $961 million. Maytag took on an additional $500 million in debt. Hoover turned out to be a bottomless pit. But the worst came in 1992, with a marketing promotion that seemed brilliant. Buy any Hoover product for as little as $165 and receive 2 free transatlantic airline tickets. More than 220,000 people responded. The company had no capacity to fulfill the offer. Years of lawsuits followed. $30 million in losses. The company that had built its name on reliability was now known for failing to deliver on a promise of free flights. In 2001, they bought Amana, a marginally profitable brand. Critics dismissively called them Amana tags. Inferior quality machines rebranded with the Maytag name that damaged the reputation with every defective unit. By 2004, the decline was undeniable. Best Buy stopped selling Maytag products. And here's the data point that explains a lot. Maytag was still producing 88% of its products in American factories with unionized workers. While its competitors had fled to Mexico and Asia, Maytag kept manufacturing in Newton. It was admirable, but in the ruthless logic of global capitalism, it was a death sentence. CEO Ralph Hake responded by cutting investment in new product development by 50%. It was like starving an athlete and expecting them to keep winning races. In 2004, Newton workers went on strike for the first time in 30 years. 1,500 workers walked out for almost a month. It was the canary dying in the coal mine. The financial vultures began circling. And finally, in August 2005, Whirlpool, the historic rival, submitted its winning bid, $20 per share. On April 1st, 2006 April Fool's Day, the acquisition was completed. Total value: $2,700,000,000. Jeff Fettig, Whirlpool's CEO, made reassuring promises about innovation and growth. 39 days later, Whirlpool announced it would close the Newton factory. 39 days. That's how long it took Whirlpool to decide that. 114 years of history, 4,000 jobs, and an entire community were expendable. But the factory closure wasn't the only blow. In July 2008, Whirlpool Corporation filed a federal lawsuit against more than 3,000 Maytag retirees. People who had worked 20, 30, 40 years in the factory. People who had retired with the promise of lifetime medical coverage, no out-of-pocket costs, no deductibles, no co-pays as a reward for decades of loyalty. Whirlpool wanted to eliminate that promise. Larry Shaver had worked at Maytag for decades. He retired in 2002, thinking his years of service had earned him a peaceful old age. He was 64 when Whirlpool filed the lawsuit. "I feel like somebody stabbed me in the heart," he said. In 2011, the court ruled in favor of Whirlpool. The promise Maytag had made for generations was declared legally voidable. While retirees were losing their medical coverage, Ralph Hake collected $9.4 million in severance pay. Remember E.H. Maytag paying wages from his own pocket during the Great Depression. Now think about Ralph Hake collecting millions while retirees lost their health insurance. The contrast isn't ironic. It's obscene. October 25, 2007 was the last day of production. Before the last washer came off the line, workers pulled out a permanent marker. One by one, they signed their names on the machine's front panel. One final statement of pride. "We built this. Our names are on it. You can't erase that." Mike Jackson was 52 years old. He'd worked at Maytag for 18 years. "I'm numb. I'm scared. I'll be all right, I think," he said, holding back emotion. He paused. "This isn't just about us. It's about our kids." Mark Wycliffe, 49, walked out carrying a sign that read, "Maytag, the dependability people." 4 generations of his family had worked in that factory. He was 3.5 years short of retiring with full benefits, 3.5 years that would never come. Tootie Sampson was 47. "When somebody dies and you don't see the body, how do you know they're gone?" she reflected. "It's definitely a death of sorts, a death to a lot of people's way of life." And then the question no one at Whirlpool wanted to hear: how can the people that allowed this to happen live with themselves? Ted Johnson, union president, gave a press conference. "They took an American icon and they ran it into the ground. What is the future for our children and our nation when companies ship away jobs even from profitable factories, reward the CEO with millions in bonuses, and have free trade agreements to help them do it?" Nobody had an answer. What followed was exactly what everyone feared. Unemployment in Newton skyrocketed. Jasper County had the highest rate of Iowa's 99 counties. The CBS program 60 Minutes visited Newton and called it the most broken-down town in America. Even the local Optimist Club chapter had closed for lack of members. Workers who had earned between $30,000 and $40,000 a year were now looking for any job they could find. Many found work that paid half as much. Economist Dave Swenson documented the shift. The county's manufacturing wages fell from 37% above the state average to 20% below. And the land itself was left scarred. EPA researchers found contaminants in the soil, chromium, PCE/TCE. Decades of manufacturing had left their mark on Newton's ground. But Newton didn't die. Wind energy companies arrived looking for workers with manufacturing experience. The unemployment rate dropped from nearly 10% to 3.5%. The historic Maytag buildings are being converted into luxury apartments and a boutique hotel. Restored exposed brick where assembly lines once stood. Newton survived. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. And something was lost, that no luxury apartment can bring back. The Maytag brand still exists, in stores, on websites, but it no longer means what it used to mean. Today, Maytag products are designed in Michigan and manufactured in Ohio, Tennessee, and Mexico. The name is just a logo that Whirlpool puts on certain models to capture the nostalgia of consumers who remember when that name meant something. Consumer reviews tell the story. Maytag is no longer the company it once was. The quality just isn't there. I bought a Maytag thinking it would last like my parents did. It lasted 2 years. The Maytag repairman wouldn't be so lonely today. What does reliability really mean? Frederick Louis Maytag defined it as a product that never lets you down. The Gyrafoam of 1922. The aluminum tub that didn't rust. The washers that lasted 25, 30 years without a single call to the repairman. But reliability can also mean something else. It can mean that a company doesn't abandon the community that built it, that a name stamped on metal implies a commitment deeper than marketing. In that sense, the sense that really matters when human lives are at stake. Maytag failed spectacularly. The brand that promised it would never let you down let 4,000 families down. The mausoleum of Frederick Louis Maytag still stands in Newton Union Cemetery. The word Maytag is still engraved in the stone. Inside, in perpetual silence, rests the boy who arrived in Iowa in a covered wagon more than 150 years ago and built something he believed would last forever. Outside, Newton carries on. As the towns in America's heartland have always carried on when the world knocks them down. Building wind turbine blades where they once built washing machines. Reinventing themselves because the alternative is death, and Newton refuses to die. But somewhere in the city, in a garage or a basement or a laundry room that hasn't been renovated since the 70s, an old Maytag washer still runs. A machine built by workers who bled blue, in a factory that no longer exists, for a company that is no longer what it promised to be. The paint is faded, the logo barely readable, but the motor starts every time you turn it on. The drum spins without complaint. The water circulates just as Howard Snyder designed it more than a century ago. Reliable to the end, more reliable than the corporation that created it. That old washer is Newton's true legacy, just a machine that refuses to break. Built by people who believed that doing things right mattered, before someone with an MBA and $1 million compensation package decided that the only thing that mattered was the bottom line of next quarter. What do we owe to the places that build us? What do we owe to the people who make the things we use every day of our lives? Newton has no answers. It only has memory. And somewhere in a basement, an old washing machine spinning in silence, reliable to the end. Made in Newton, Iowa, where they once bled blue.